It was the 1970s, the last summer in my hometown, before heading off to university. The dog days of August had a bittersweet, elegiac quality. We wanted to leave home so bad we could taste it, but we also realized we would be leaving most of our friendships behind, some for good. The weather was beautiful, which somehow added to the sadness. We were sitting in lawn chairs behind my buddy's house, sucking on stubbies. My bud had a guest from out west, who brought with him a bottle of ouzo, or, as he liked to call it, Greek vodka. We were shooting the shit about the paranormal, and women, music, and women, movies, and women, and I think we also talked a bit about women. But mainly we talked about UFOs. Eric von Daniken was extremely popular at the time, and we were talking about the whole ancient astronaut concept when Danny, the guy from out west, said, "What the hell is that?" A whitish, faintly luminous cloud had appeared overhead and just seemed to hang there in the night sky. "What is that? Smoke?" Buddy said. "Is there a fire somewhere?" "It's just kind of hanging there," I said, "like it was stationary or something." "Maybe it's a UFO," Danny barked, and we all laughed. It was well after midnight when I left to make the long walk back to the apartment building, but I didn't mind. I was in a good mood, smoking cigarettes, listening to rock songs in my head, and thinking about the night's conversation. In other words, I was thinking about nothing really, not even about women. I wore my hair long in those days, and yeah, I had hair, and I wore it right down to my shoulders, and as I walked along, I began to feel a strange, prickly sensation, as if my hair was starting to rise. And it was. I instinctively put my hands up to push it back down, and as I did, I looked up and was surprised to see a brightness overhead, a brightness which emanated from a whitish, faintly luminous cloud, which looked very similar to the one we had observed from my friend's backyard. As I gazed up at the strange cloud, the prickly sensation increased, and I was swept with an intense sense of longing, a longing which seemed to encapsulate all the bittersweet sadness and anticipation of that last summer of childhood. I wanted to go to the cloud, to be with it, to rise up in the air, rise. And then, suddenly, I was frightened, very frightened. This wasn't a normal cloud. What kind of cloud glowed like that? Like it was phosphorescent or radioactive or something. What kind of cloud followed people around? Clouds can't follow you around, right? Right? I turned down a side street and began walking rapidly, trying to get away from the prickly sensation and from the cloud, which continued to hang overhead, above me, as if it was keeping pace with my movements, as if it was stalking me. I tried to walk faster and refused to look upwards, even as the crawling of my scalp became more and more distracting. I also resisted the urge to break into a run, until I felt the invisible hands touch my elbows. I panicked and actually ran out onto the nearby road without looking. There was a flash of blinding light, the blaring of a loud horn, followed by an angry voice. "What the hell you doing, man?" I recognized the voice as belonging to a guy from school. I hurried over to his 66 Fairlane and yelped, "Can you give me a ride?" "Somebody after you?" the guy asked, and when I nodded, he said, "Get in." I can't remember the story I made up for the Fairlane dude, but whatever it was, he bought it. When he dropped me off, I quickly ducked inside the building and hid in the apartment with all the lights out. But the whole time, as I stood in darkness, I could see through the windows the strange, luminous cloud moving back and forth across the night sky, back and forth, as if it was searching for something. Or someone. Searching for me? No way was that a normal cloud. For the next few weeks, I was apprehensive every time I left the apartment and tried never to be alone when I did. But in less than a month, I left town, and with first-year university to worry about, I began to forget, and eventually forgot, the entire episode. And it would have stayed forgotten, but for Ian's suicide attempt. I heard about it when I was home for the Christmas break, but I didn't have an opportunity to talk to Ian until the next summer. I'd come back to town to spend the summer working my old job as a hospital porter. Ian was an outpatient. He seemed the same laid-back, soft-spoken dude he'd always been. In other words, he seemed totally sane. We agreed to meet up for beers, and he told me the following. "You heard about what happened?" "I heard something. I didn't try to kill myself." I made some kind of non-committal response, which appeared to irritate him. "I always thought of you as a guy who could think for himself. So do you want to hear what really happened?" I did. On the night in question, Ian had had a major row with his parents and had stormed out of the house. Ian's old people wanted him to become an accountant, but he wanted to go to art school instead. He had walked down to the lake and walked out to the end of the pier, a haven for upset youth throughout my upset youth. Ian sat at the base of the lighthouse at the end of the pier and contemplated his situation and his prospects. In the end, he decided he would leave home, work at a factory job for a year or two, and put himself through art school. Nothing was going to interfere with my dream of becoming an artist, he told me. I was going to make it, and I knew I was going to make it. Directly above me, the clouds seemed to glow with an exquisite and ethereal light which radiated joy. I experienced such a feeling of relief at having finally come to a decision. It felt akin to ecstasy. My spirit seemed to be rising out of my body, like I was rising into the air. And then, suddenly, I was rising into the air. What felt like hands had taken me by the elbows and had pulled me up off the ground. My scalp was tingling and my joy had turned to horror. I cried out and tried to fight the invisible hands, but the harder I fought, the stronger their grip. I kept yelling, "No, no, no!" And after they had lifted me about 20 feet off the ground, they let go. Fortunately, I was over the lake and landed in the water, and was quickly fished out by the people who came running when they heard my screams. I tried to explain what happened, but I was in shock and pretty incoherent, and wound up in the psych ward. As soon as they found out about my fight with the old people, they accused me of committing suicide. And what could I say? I tried to tell the doctors what had happened, which really did make me sound crazy. No one saw me up in the air, so they just thought I'd thrown myself into the lake. Eventually, I just went along with them. It was easier that way. Ian said his parents no longer opposed him going to art school, but he'd kind of lost interest and didn't figure it was worth having spent time in the psych ward. I never saw Ian again, and later that summer, he disappeared. For good. Vanished. I don't think Ian thought I believed him, but I did. The prickly sensation on the scalp, the invisible hands, the luminous cloud. Could the same thing have happened to me if I hadn't escaped by car? Would I have disappeared? For good? Vanished? Like poor Ian? If so, who or what is responsible? And what have they done to poor Ian? Once upon a time, and back in the day, but not that long ago, people used to party and swim in the river that ran through town. Some swam down by the marina, others down where the river emptied into the lake. But the best spot was underneath the CN train bridge, where the river widened and deepened. During the hot days of summer, the place was crowded with teens that swam in the dark waters. But at night, it was taken over by an older crowd of party animals who brought weed, beer, and boomboxes, the loud rock and rap echoing off the valley walls. The local constabulary knew it was happening and ignored it. They figured it was for the CN Railway Police to deal with. So the spot became party central, rivaled only by the silo. Simon went there from time to time, but always felt he had to watch his step. There were some tough guys there, aggressive guys, and he was short, slight, and did extremely well in school, in such things as physics and trigonometry. Simon had only come down to the river because he was hoping to meet someone to spend the last weeks of summer with, before he headed off to university in September, in a little more than 6 weeks. And especially because he thought Ava would be there. Simon had first got to talk to her, got to know her, in grade 11 biology, where she had been his lab partner, and he had taken charge of the more icky assignments, such as frog dissection. He knew she liked him. Afterwards, they had talked frequently, eaten lunch at the same table. He'd even danced with her a few times. But Ava was hot and had no shortage of boyfriends, jock types with their Mustangs and Camaros. Not much room in that busy social life for a nerd who walked to school and who was into differential calculus. Even his name, Simon, while a fine old name, couldn't compete with Derek and Rocky. Nope. Simon was firmly stuck in the friend zone, the twilight zone. Da 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 da. Tonight really felt like a scene from that old black and white TV show. That or something out of a painting by Hieronymus Bosch. They had built a fire which cast a lurid glow over the cavorting bodies, some dancing to hip-hop, others diving and swimming in the nearby dark waters. A clump of partiers stood around a group of bikers who had ridden their motorcycles and dirt bikes down into the valley. Simon didn't much like the vibe. The crowd tonight seemed older, meaner, and vaguely threatening. Simon had been bullied enough to learn to avoid problematic situations like this one. Ava was flitting around from group to group, but he found it hard to see her in the shadows cast by the flickering flames. In any event, there would be no opportunity to talk to her alone, which is what he really wanted to do. Simon had come on his own, and so he decided to just leave, walking away from the fire and into the shadows. But he knew the terrain like the back of his hand. The moon would be coming up just after 9, so he had time to climb the bluff where he would have a good look at it before going home alone. Simon couldn't remember what this month's full moon was called, but he hoped it wasn't the honeymoon. That would kinda hurt. But Simon hadn't gone very far when he heard someone call his name, someone running up to him in the dark. It was Ava. "How can you see in the dark?" she said, laughing. And then she stumbled, whether accidentally or on purpose. Simon didn't know, but he automatically stepped forward and put his arms on her, before letting go, afraid of offending her. Before he could answer, she repeated her question. "How can you see in the dark?" "I know the terrain pretty well." "Where are you going?" To watch the moon rise." "How romantic." Simon wasn't sure if Ava was making fun of him or not, so he simply said, "You can see it better atop the ridge." Ava reached out and took Simon's hand, and he led her through the darkness to the top of the ridge. As they topped the bluff, the moon, the full Sturgeon's moon, appeared right on cue, bathing the woods in the valley below in an intense and silvery light. The scene was so breathtaking, so lovely, that neither of them spoke or felt the need to speak, which suited Simon, who was intensely afraid of saying something stupid. But no spell lasts forever. "What's that?" Simon heard Ava say. Looking to where she was pointing, he saw what appeared to be a white coat, gleaming in the moonlight and lying by the side of the trail. Taking a better look, he saw it was a trench coat, more beige than white. It looked like a nice one, too. Expensive. "Oh, I like that," Ava said, and she was just reaching for it when Simon grabbed her arm, more roughly than he had intended, raising his voice to say, "Wait." Ava was completely taken aback and somewhat annoyed. "What's wrong?" she demanded petulantly. I don't know," Simon said slowly. And the truth was, he didn't know. But something was telling him to leave it alone. "I just don't think we should touch it." I mean, where did it come from?" he concluded rather lamely. It was then they both heard the booming voice they both recognized as belonging to Mac. Mac was a big red-headed guy with a booming voice who played center on the high school football team, and Simon hated him, as Mac used to push him around when they were younger, and he still treated Simon like crap. "What's the matter, Sime?" Mac said in his usual loud, belligerent manner. "Afraid of an old coat?" I just think we should be careful touching it," Simon answered, wishing he could tell Mac to piss off. But Mac was already reaching for the coat. "It looks like a pretty nice coat. Hey, It's a spy coat, too. I was going to take it, Ava said. Apparently, she had already forgotten about Simon. Mac brayed his loud laugh and said, "Sorry, babe, this is way too big for you, but it fits me perfectly." Mac had already wrapped the off-white trench coat around his big frame, and in truth, it was a good fit. He modeled it for them, strutting around in the moonlight, before grabbing Ava's hand. "Come on, babe, back to the party. Let's show 'em all my new coat." But as they headed off into the darkness, the big lummox called over his shoulder, "Catch you later, Simey." Simon had no choice but to walk home alone. But he hadn't gone very far before the screaming started. He stopped and listened. It seemed to be Mac who was screaming in agony. But when Ava began screaming too, Simon started running. He stumbled down the side of the ridge in darkness, and in peril of falling on his face. But Simon knew the ground by heart, and soon reached the spot where Mac writhed in the dirt, surrounded by a circle of onlookers. Simon found Ava, who was crying and in hysterics. Once again, taking her arm, he said, "What happened?" I don't know, she wailed. "He started complaining he was hot and he was going to take the coat off, but when he tried, he started screaming that something was eating him, that he was all burning up like." Mac was still screaming, his booming voice a shrill falsetto. "Get it off me! Get it off me! It's chewing me!" Several guys leaned forward and tore the trench coat from Mac's body, and then recoiled in horror, one of them even vomiting. Mac's huge muscular arms had been reduced to two pitiful red stumps. Gaping holes with puckered edges covered his chest and sides, and through one it was possible to see his lungs, flushed with blood and billowing as he tried to breathe. Mac was melting, literally melting before their eyes. Now this was before the arrival of cell phones, so it took some time to get help and to get EMS on scene under the train bridge. And by that time, Mac's legs were mere stumps, and he was no longer able to speak. As for the coat, it was forgotten in all the excitement, and had, in fact, disappeared. Mac died that night. If there was a cause of death, Simon never learned what it was. Ava ended up in the psych ward. Simon left for school soon afterward, and he never saw her again, although he too had to undergo counseling for persistent nightmares. Simon would often wonder exactly what had happened, and what role, if any, the off-white trench coat might have played. And then, years later, he came across some very strange information on YouTube about a cryptid called the Rumptifusel. The Rumptifusel, he read, one of the world's strangest creatures, and possibly an alien life form. The Rumptifusel drapes itself over logs and along the side of trails, where its blanket-thin frame and minky fur make it look like an expensive overcoat or rug that someone has lost. But when the unwary victim goes to pick it up, the Rumptifusel wraps itself around the poor unfortunate, the beast's myriad sucking mouths, quickly stripping flesh from bone, flesh from bone, until very little remains. Fur coat? Simon wondered if it could also present as a trench coat. Simon even discovered a poem about the Rumptifusel, albeit a bad one. If alongside of the pathway you espy a new fur coat, do your best to make a getaway. Yes, hurry on up the tote, for what you see is no garment, it's not anything to wear, but will stick as fast as fresh cement, and your flesh begin to tear. 'Tis the evil Rumptifusel, with its furry, glossy pelt. What you see is only its shell, like a dress coat with a belt. The instant that you grab for it, it will make a grab for you, and swallow you up every bit. Then turn your bones to grue. The moral of the story? Your parents were right. Don't pick that up. You don't know where it's been. After the rain ended, I decided to go for a nocturnal stroll. It was nearly midnight, and the streets were almost deserted. Almost. I strolled at random through the fringes of the downtown area, enjoying my solitude and the fresh night air, when I noticed the clouds. They were low, perhaps a mere 200 or 300 feet above the city streets, and wispy, ethereal, with long tendrils or fingers which seemed to be reaching down, to be clawing towards the ground. I watched the clouds, and as my mind was empty of its usual cares, my worries blown away by the sharp breeze, I let my imagination run free to build castles in the air, castles in the clouds, like when I was a kid, when I would lie on my back in the front yard, staring up at the blue sky and the clouds, and seeing shapes. Dogs, turtles, dragons, faces. Well, tonight I saw fingers. Hands? No, not hands. Not fingers. Jellyfish. Several of the low-hanging clouds had taken on the characteristic shape of a jellyfish. The bell-shaped head, the tentacles, and the long stinging arms floating just above the roofline, and extending closer and closer to the wet pavement below. The sight fascinated me, but it also grossed me out, for there is nothing worse than being stung by a jellyfish. I had seen, or perhaps I should say, I had heard the results of a jellyfish attack. I had been on vacation in Florida with my family and was at the beach when a boy around 10 or 11 got too close to a jellyfish. I think he may have even been trying to pick it up. Damn. I can still hear the kid's screams in my head. Naturally, I had to check out what was happening. And the kid's arms and chest were turning purple from where the tentacles had gotten him, and he was vomiting. They hustled him off the beach pretty fast. I think what made the whole thing worse for me was the fact the boy was around my age. At any rate, I never forgot the incident. I heard another noise from somewhere in front of me, and looking down, instead of looking up at the clouds, I saw a figure, a man, walking a few hundred yards ahead of me. He was talking on a phone or Bluetooth and was being kind of noisy. I tried to ignore him and let my mind continue to run free. But why do people have to talk so loud when on the phone? It was spoiling my mood, and to my amusement, the racket seemed to annoy the clouds as well. As I watched, the misty fingers, the vaporous tentacles, seemed to be reaching down towards the man, as if to pluck him up off the ground. I decided to turn around, as the annoying person was spoiling my mood. But I hadn't gone very far when the damp stillness of the evening was pierced by a loud, wailing scream. I quickly turned around and looked in the direction where the screams had occurred. But nothing. The street was empty. There weren't even any cars. The shrieks came again, and this time I looked up. And there, up in the air, about 100 feet off the ground, his legs kicking wildly, was the man. It took me a moment. Okay, it took me several moments to process what was happening. But as I focused on the man, on his writhing body, I saw that he appeared to be gripped by fingers or tentacles of mist, of cloud, ghostly ethereal fingers which had plucked him up off the ground and which had raised him several hundred feet and then suddenly let him go. The man had been bawling in terror, but now he only had time for one long, drawn-out wail before his body struck the earth with a loud thud. I sprinted towards the figure, which lay crumpled on the glistening pavement, well knowing that I would find a corpse. The dead man appeared to have had every bone in his body broken. There was blood everywhere, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was that every inch of the man's skin, every inch that I could see in the dim light, appeared burnt, in some cases burnt black. What happened to you, my friend? I said aloud, when I had a sudden premonition that there was something there, something nearby. I looked around, but couldn't see anything or anyone. But then I looked up. A number of what appeared to be ghostly, ethereal tentacles or feelers waved directly above my head. Tentacles of mist, of cloud, and I knew, with a sudden burst of terror, that they were looking for me, and that if they found me, I was dead. I ran, knowing those things were going to get me, and they would have, if I hadn't noticed the old warehouse. I had wandered into an area of old abandoned factories and storage facilities. The building I now saw was an old paper factory. There was an arched entryway leading into the interior, and I went for it, just in time. I stood in the darkness, looking out to where the burnt, broken corpse lay on the wet concrete. The fingers, the tentacles of mist, had reached the ground and were feeling around, searching for me, and as if they could smell me, the tentacles lifted up and pointed in my direction. They could sense it, if not see me. I moved back further into the building, into the darkness, and the tentacles began to follow me. In the gloom I noticed a door, and in desperation I tried it. And it opened. Just in time, too, for I was no sooner inside when something slammed the outside of the door. Hard! I leaned against the door to hold it shut, as whatever was outside, the tentacles, whatever was outside, kept slamming it over and over. I had to use all my force to hold it shut. And then I noticed that little points of mist were beginning to seep under the door like probing fingertips. I thought about trying to run further into the building, but I didn't dare let go of the door. The only sound in that enclosed space was the sound of my labored breathing. But after a few minutes, I became aware of another sound, a loud, persistent sound, the sound of a torrential downpour. I noticed the misty fingertips were no longer there. I waited several minutes, then tentatively opened the door. The mist was gone, the tentacles, the probing, stinging fingers, all gone, as was the corpse. Vanished! It had vanished! I made my way home in the torrential downpour, no longer caring about getting soaked. Over the next few days, I scanned the papers to see if there was any mention of the discovery of a dead body. But nothing. The corpse really had vanished. So what happened? The only conclusion I can come to is that there are things living up in the sky. Giant, deadly, jellyfish-like creatures. I remember having seen an old book by a guy named Gaddis who claimed such monsters really did exist. And then there was that story by the creator of Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, the story called The Horror of the Heights, which features deadly jellyfish living in the upper atmosphere. All I know is that if there is a single cloud in the sky, I'm not going outside. My grandparents were old hippies, and they used to play this song by this Judy woman, and one of its lines has stuck with me in my predicament. The line, I really don't know clouds at all. Me neither. Or maybe I know them too well. Too damn well. The moral of the story: if it is impossible to fully know and understand another human being, how the hell are you going to understand a cloud? If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the black-eyed children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,500 subs. Till midnight. Cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix here. That's PX here. While the music was the eerie and disturbing Aftermath by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. If alongside of the pathway you espy a new fur coat, do your best to make a getaway. Yes, hurry on up the tote, for what you see is no garment. It's not anything to wear, but will stick as fast as fresh cement, and your flesh begin to tear. 'Tis the evil Rumptifusel, with its furry, glossy pelt. What you see is only its shell, like a dress coat with a belt. The instant that you grab for it, it will make a grab for you, and swallow you up every bit, then turn your bones to grue. I swear this ain't a tall tale yarn. Oh, oh, oh. In those little balls of fur are human remains turned into yarn, not owl pellets, dear sir. The Rumptifusel, one of the world's strangest creatures, and possibly an alien life form. The Rumptifusel is living proof of our parents saying, "Don't pick that up. You don't know where it's been." The Rumptifusel drapes itself over logs and along the side of trails, where its blanket-thin frame and minky fur makes it look like an expensive overcoat or rug that someone has lost. But when the unwary victim goes to pick it up, the Rumptifusel wraps itself around the poor unfortunate. The beast's myriad sucking mouths, quickly stripping flesh from bone until very little remains. These remains are sometimes confused with owl pellets, but not by experienced hunters and lumberjacks. Just doing some experiments with sound today. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and drop a like, and consider subscribing for more cryptids, night floaters, or general weirdness. Stay hungry. Dress code with a belt. The instant grab for